Okay, so this is a focus on A Christmas Carol, specifically through different contextual links that will be useful when including them in your essay writing. So AO3 context. Starting with Thomas Malthus. Now, Thomas Malthus came up with an idea which is known as Malthusian theory, and one of the main reasons Dickens wrote the book was to argue against Thomas Malthus and his theory of overpopulation, basically. And so there are two quotes I'm just going to put up here. The power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man. And the constant effort towards population, which is found in most societies, increases the number of people before the means of subsistence are increased. So what does it all mean? It's important to reference this because not only does it show further understanding, but it's one of the main issues that Dickens had in terms of Malthusian theory. Dickens opposed this, and this is what Malthus thought: if you improve the living conditions of the poor, they will reproduce more and create worse conditions. People will reproduce more quickly than food supplies will increase. By reducing the population, everyone's standard of living will get better. And this is where the quote, "decrease the surplus population," comes into, something that Scrooge says to the portly gentleman towards the beginning of the novella. Surplus meaning add-ons or extra. And if population increases, the surplus population will live in poverty, as there is not enough food and wealth to go around. And what I've put here is just a very basic explanation here. So Malthus is pointing out that the population was increasing during the Victorian period. And in blue there is the population increasing, and in red you've got the resources. That's like food and shelter and things like that. And of course, as the population increases, it will get to a point of crisis, as you can see there. And so Malthus's idea of solving that problem would be to allow the poor to basically die out, the vulnerable, the surplus, if you like, to therefore allow everyone to have enough resources. And Dickens disagreed with this and uses the character Scrooge to almost educate and possibly shock wealthy readers, challenging their own social ignorance and lack of social responsibility. Dickens wanted to challenge that by referencing Malthusian theory and basically saying how wrong it is to think that way, and hopefully encourage the wealthy readers to change their ways and help restore the balance in a very divided, unequal society. Secondly, we focus on the rich and the poor. So in an unbalanced, unfair society that I've just mentioned, it leads nicely to this point where there was an enormous class divide between the rich and the poor. Many wealthy Victorians cared little for the needs and wants of the poor. It was commonly believed that wealth equated to happiness. But obviously through A Christmas Carol we can see how a character such as Scrooge idolises money, wealth. That actually it's a good message to wealthy readers that it doesn't equate to happiness. And as a result, many suffered in workhouses and factories across the country. The owners of such places often focused on personal wealth and gain instead of humanity, just as Scrooge does in Stave 1. Dickens believed that these selfish, ignorant people were having a greater impact on society than they realised. And generations of children lost their childhood innocence as a result of child labour and destitution, similar to Dickens, which I'll come to later on. And Dickens wanted to therefore bring about social reform, reduce the class divide, for the rich and the wealthy to be socially responsible for others, because hopefully through A Christmas Carol it would make wealthy readers more alert and realising that actions do have consequences, and they should choose their actions wisely, as they can have a greater impact on the world than they realise. Thirdly, coming to the poor law and the workhouse. So 9 years before A Christmas Carol was written, in 1834, the Poor Law Amendment Act was passed by Parliament. And so basically it was designed to reduce the cost of looking after the poor. And if people wanted help, they had to go into a workhouse to get it. It was manual labour, it was excessive, it was horrible conditions, males and females lived separately. People had to follow strict rules and were on a bad diet of bread and watery soup. And there was a big focus on religion in an attempt to save their souls. Religion was a very prominent thing in the Victorian period. And people would only go into a workhouse as a last resort, and many never left. Looking at context with utilitarianism, philosophy of Jeremy Bentham, which was his belief in the greatest happiness of the greatest number, a position that was used to justify the centralisation of the poor relief in workhouses. The idea that people were happier when they were together. So those images down there would support that. We've also got the importance of the church and charity. Church was seen as high up in society, so they're highly regarded in society. Very religious time, like I said to you before, it was a very prominent thing in the Victorian period. Over half the population regularly attended church. During the Victorian period, the church discouraged financial assistance to the poor, stating that their situation was a result of sin and their only chance of redemption was through prayer. And this attitude was also seen by people like Dickens as being very un-Christian and went against the teachings of Jesus. And through A Christmas Carol, Dickens challenges the church's attitude towards the poor, believing that everyone should be charitable and help reduce the class divide in a very rigid society. The church were concerned that being too philanthropic meaning too charitable, too kind-hearted, too supportive, and all those positive words, would lead to a lazy poor, which would require more and more support. And they encouraged prayer. That was their way of saying that they are helping the poor. Prayer was the best means. And of course Dickens did not believe that at all. Believed that people needed to be actively actively improving the lives of others and helping others and being very supportive. So Dickens really disagreed with the attitude of the church. Charity within the community. During the Victorian period, it became fashionable amongst some members of the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is another word for middle class. An example of middle class character in A Christmas Carol is Scrooge. It had become fashionable amongst some members of the bourgeoisie to help those in need. Another example, say, of a member of the bourgeoisie helping those in need, that would be Fred. Fred represents the philanthropic middle class members of society. So someone like Fred would be trying to help those in need. It did go against the teachings of the church, but many, including Dickens, show charity in a more Christian way of helping through the novella. Poor received money, time and expertise from charitable Victorian people and organisations to help them deal with poverty. Most of these charities believed in the theory of self-help and did not think the government should intervene. Many also believed that the poor should be educated to live better lives and improve themselves, and that they would provide this education. It's worth noting that Dickens believed that education was the best route out of poverty. Others linked to religion and charitable individuals often saw themselves as doing God's work in helping the poor. Now to focus on Dickens' own life experiences. He was an outspoken social critic, trying to support the poor, highlighting the issues relating to poverty. And Dickens sought to help the poor by looking at the class divide, social inequality. So you could argue that he was very much ahead of his time, very forward thinking. His family were part of the bourgeoisie, so the middle class, but his dad didn't manage money well, and at the age of 12 his dad was sent to a debtor's prison. which you can see almost like the influence behind A Christmas Carol of having Scrooge as a money lender, a mean-spirited money lender. And at a young age, Charles Dickens went to work in a warehouse, so it was very much poor conditions, and again, loss of childhood innocence there. His aunt died and Dickens' dad used some of the inheritance to pay off his debts, so money was a big thing. And Dickens stopped working at the factory after a few months, but the impact of this life resonated through a huge number of his works, including Christmas Carol. But still terrible with money. His dad would later get into debt again, and Dickens, as a successful author, was often called upon financially to support his family. So putting on the board here the two words that I think are really prevalent in A Christmas Carol: misanthropic and philanthropic, and what they both mean. So, misanthropic is having or showing a dislike of other people, unsociable or unfriendly, for example, Scrooge. And philanthropic is the opposite of that. It's about being charitable, seeking to promote the welfare of others, generous and kind, like Fred, for example. And one of the last few things here is about the deserving and undeserving poor. The deserving poor were those who were poor through no fault of their own. So, for example, illness, an accident, age, something like that. And they were in society considered to be the poor that deserved support, basically. And then you had the undeserving poor, those who were poor because of laziness or personal problems, such as drug addiction, drunkenness, they were a criminal, things like that. So you have two different types of poor in society. And the very last point is Christmas, and written in 1843. Basically, Charles Dickens, through the book, made Christmas a big sort of cultural holiday, made it what it is today. Because before the book was written, it had never really been seen as like a festive time for family get-togethers and presents and things like that. It was never seen in that sort of way. So through the book, Dickens made Christmas what it is today, with the family get-togethers, the Christmas meal, the gifts, the kindness, the charity to others, and almost Christmas is like the backdrop of the book, because through Christmas you're allowed to see the importance of charity, family, the dangers of greed, ignorance, the issues of poverty. It all relates to Christmas as the backdrop, to allow wealthy readers to reflect and almost reconsider their position of things in life, and to be socially responsible, to help reduce the class divide and support those that are vulnerable and deprived. So therefore, A Christmas Carol revived the custom of taking the day off work, gathering for big family feasts and getting generous with gifts. So it was all about generosity and thinking of others, and that's the basis of A Christmas Carol.